The 50-year exile in Babylon began immediately after the great traumas of losing their land, their king, and their temple, with its related sacrifices and holy days. With the loss of the temple, local places of worship called synagogues soon became the primary gathering point for worship and socialization, and rabbis replaced temple priests as the primary religious figures. This was helped by the fact that the Babylonian practice of assimilation differed from their predecessors, the Assyrians, in one crucial way that literally led to the survival of the Jewish people. They settled these deportees in sufficient numbers that they were able to maintain their ethnic identity. Life for the Jewish people took a radical turn in 539 BCE, when the Babylonian Empire was overthrown by the Medes and Persians from modern-day Iran. The first emperor of this regime was Cyrus the Great, who's spoken of so highly in the Bible, and changed the public policy regarding conquered peoples. Whereas previous regimes had used deportation as a means of securing not only land, but also the quelling of rebellion, Cyrus advocated for returning conquered peoples to their homeland as grateful clients of the Persian Empire. Thus, in 539, the first party of Jews returned to their homeland, and by 537, work had begun on rebuilding both the wall around the capital city of Jerusalem as well as the reconstruction of the temple. This return would take place in successive waves over the course of almost 100 years. This temple, known as the Second Temple, would be built on the same size and scale as Solomon's temple, though obviously less ornately, and the Mosaic sacrificial system was restarted after almost 50 years of inactivity. The leaders of this reconstruction were the biblical characters of Nehemiah and Ezra, and it can be properly said that it was during this time that Judaism, with which we are so familiar, emerged. These leaders challenged the Jewish people to remember the loss of Solomon's temple and to not repeat the same mistakes of infidelity and idolatry. One of the primary teaching tools they used was the sacred texts of Judaism, the Torah, prophets, and writings, which were now being compiled and assembled. The hope of the Jewish people at this time was the eventual restoration of Israel as a national, religious, and ethnic entity. But while the Persian Empire provided several opportunities for limited sovereignty, they never gave the Jews the independence they so desired. These religious and political hopes were made more remote when the Persian Empire was conquered by Alexander the Great in 331, and Jerusalem began to be administered by Alexander's successor, Seleucus, in 321. The Seleucid Empire would rule Jerusalem from 312 to 164 BCE and was a keen advocate of Hellenization, in which local traditions gave way to a common or universal Greek culture, Greek language, coinage, philosophy, and worldview, together with a policy of respect and protection for local religions. This, in turn, led to the development of two distinct Jewish parties: those who favored Hellenistic Judaism, a form of Judaism that combined Jewish religious tradition with elements of Greek culture, and those who opposed it. This peaceful respect was shattered when a new Seleucid king, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, decided to suddenly overturn the previous policy of respect and protection and began banning key Jewish religious rites and traditions in Judea, and also set up an idol of Zeus on the Temple Mount. These actions sparked the Maccabean revolt, which eventually led to the formation of an independent Jewish kingdom known as the Hasmonean dynasty. This kingdom was also known as the Independent Kingdom of Israel, and it lasted from 140 BCE to 63 BCE, and was marked by a bitter civil war in its latter years. This civil war, combined with severely weakened Seleucid Empire, led to a Roman invasion in 63 BCE, culminating in a siege of Jerusalem, which ended with the capture of the city and the establishment of the Roman province of Judea. The Jews had enjoyed independence for a little less than 100 years, but this dream was now gone. Judea was given an appointed Roman governor who was responsible for the regulation of trade and the maximization of tax revenue, the latter being quite burdensome to the Jewish people. Roman rule also allowed for the appointment of a king, in this case Herod the Great, a convert to Judaism who reigned from 37 to 4 BCE. His reign was marked by colossal building and public works projects, the greatest of which was the massive expansion of the Second Temple and the construction of the Temple Mount, all of which were funded through an exorbitant tax which ruined many people financially. This tax was collected by Jews who collaborated with the Romans and won the franchise to collect tax in their towns. Herod was also known for his cruelty, as he employed a secret police and informers, had a bodyguard of over 2,000 mercenary soldiers, and fiercely protected his kingdom. For example, after several hundred rebels were captured, he had their families crucified before them, and then they themselves were crucified. His reign came to an end in 4 BCE, but not before he killed all the infant boys in Bethlehem, in order to assure that the prophecies of the visiting Magi concerning the King of the Jews did not come to pass. This tension in the occupying Romans and the heavily burdened Jews continued to grow worse each year, with sporadic outbreaks of violence, which were crushed by the Romans with extreme prejudice. In 66 CE, the tensions reached a breaking point. An open rebellion broke out. Originally starting as anti-taxation protests, it soon led to attacks upon Roman citizens by the Jews. In response, the Roman governor, Gaius Florus, plundered the temple and launched a raid on the city, arresting numerous senior Jewish figures. This, in turn, prompted a wider, larger-scale rebellion, and the Roman military garrison of Judea was quickly overrun by the rebels, while the pro-Roman king Herod Agrippa II, together with Roman officials, fled Jerusalem. Emperor Nero gave the task of crushing the rebellion in Judea to his experienced general Vespasian in 67 CE, and over the next 3 years the Romans subjugated the rebellious province. After a 7-month siege, Jerusalem finally fell to the Roman legions, and the Second Temple was destroyed. Judaism was fundamentally altered. With the Second Temple now gone, there was no longer a way to sustain the sacrificial system, which gave way to the current form of Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism, which allows Jews to continue their culture and religion away from Jerusalem. For the next 1,700 years, the Jewish people dispersed throughout the world, especially in the latter part of the 1700s into Eastern Europe, where they continued to practice their faith in the midst of a larger Gentile culture which neither understood them nor particularly liked them. So sporadic violent persecutions were often the norm. Limited to certain neighborhoods or ghettos and professions such as moneylender, they were truly people without a country. They were always the suspicious outsider. All of this changed in the 1850s, when Germany became the first nation to offer them full citizenship without restrictions. How ironic it is, then, that less than 80 years later, it would be this same German nation who would successfully do what no other nation had done before: use the modern sciences and technologies to systematically eliminate Jewish people from the earth. At least 6 million Jews would die in this system of death. Largely in response to the horror of the Holocaust, the Jewish people were once again able to form their own government with their own laws and on their old ancestral lands in what is now Palestine. Since 586, the Jewish people have been able to have independence for 2 time periods, both of them less than 100 years. First, that during the Maccabean revolt, and the 71 years since 1948. There are 3 main sections of the Jewish scripture: the law, or the Torah, the prophets, or the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim, or the writings. Just as we will take the Old and New Testaments and speak of them as the Bible, so the Jews take the first few letters of the 3 sections of their scripture and call it the Tanakh. While all 3 sections are important, the most important section of the Bible is the Law, or Torah. It is within these 5 books, spanning Genesis through Deuteronomy, that we find the precious treasure of the Hebrew stories and the greatest gift of all, the Mosaic covenant. It is this covenant, with all its stipulations and commands, which has most shaped the Jewish people and their understanding of God. However, the covenant has 613 commandments, and because contexts are often so very different, it's vital that we understand how, when, and in what ways these laws apply to human life. Thus, a fundamental task for all Jews is to do some midrash work, or to interpret the ancient Torah laws in ways that will apply to everyday problems. Over the years, the Jewish religious leaders have collected the most important interpretations into 2 collections: the Mishnah, or the full tradition of the oral Torah, and the Gemara, or further commentary on the Mishnah. Together, these 2 serve as the foundational interpretations of the Torah and are called the Talmud. After the Hebrew Bible itself, this is the most important body of Jewish literature.